All right, I thought I would talk about uh, a possible insight into the rise and fall of civilizations or societies or something like that. The collapse of meaning, which typically means something like lack of a genuinely unifying narrative in a society, but not in the usual sense of people talking about it, or not in the usual way people are talking about it necessarily. Maybe in the similar sense, but not the usual way they talk about it. Um, and do what you can, self sacrifice, but do what you can as self sacrifice and do what you can as self care, and collapsing one's expectations of where they can control things to a manageable level, um, and a little bit of humility in knowing your limits and so on, coupled with experiences of hypomania on my own part, from drinking too much caffeine and sugar at a time sometimes, or something like that, and being 140 IQ and a little bit of touching on madness. So basically, do what you can heroism and do what you can self care. We all know the usual spiel: the rise and fall of empires, crises, and stuff call for heroes and so on. And what a hero is, it's basically someone that sacrifices themselves for the sake of the wider community, or another person, or animal, or something like that. It's a self sacrifice for the benefit of others, and so on. And this is a genuine sort of wider societal good if more people do it more often, a little bit. It generally works for society, but it's not something you can force. If I may be honest, heroism is the force multiplier of self interest. So, like I mentioned, that maybe 70-30 split between right wing dominance and left wing representation is good. Um, so, self interest is generally the foundation, the the uh, the addition, plus one of society, and heroism is the multiplier. And if you don't have self interest as a foundation, you have zero, and no matter how much you multiply zero, you get zero. So you need the foundation in order to multiply something. Um, and there's a lot of confusion and mix up between the left and the right now. And basically, the reason why the woke left are so cancerous is not because they're necessarily left at all in a certain sense. It's more that they don't understand genuine heroism because they want their comfort and they want to be popular, rich, and famous for forcing other people to be heroes, basically, in a sense, and self-sacrifice themselves for everyone else. And the thing is, heroes have limits. A hero cannot sacrifice himself beyond his own limits of tolerance. Um, uh, Basically, no one is perfect. So expecting perfection and total self-sacrifice for all wider humanity is not a good move. Expecting like 1 out of 8 people to sacrifice themselves for, whether they're rich or poor, even to sacrifice the poor of that 1 billion people for the other the other 7.5 billion people is not responsible. That is irresponsible. And that's what wokeism expects, basically. Now, the lack of a uniting narrative is important because left and right split in society, and postmodernism is particularly the expression of this, is the dissolution and dissolving of meaning in your wider society. You need a heroic cultural narrative. And the thing is, the West is its own culture in a sense, as well as Europe, as well as Britain, as well as America, as well as Canada. But there's certain overlaps of similarity in their narratives naturally. And what multiculturalism does is it dissolves the narrative of a society that was once unifying because everyone was mostly like each other, but there was also that eternal left and right, male female kind of split, yin and yang split, unique to that geographical location and its history and culture. And basically, what happens is the left seeks to artificially manufacture heroes out of other people, not in the sense of fostering their growth, but by demanding self-sacrifice. And what we know is that fostering other people's growth is what ultimately is the path to getting them to self-sacrifice without losing their lives or without tormenting themselves completely. Because you might expect a rich person to be a local community leader and hero in a sense and, you know, give charitably to the poor and stuff like that. But would you expect a poor person to do it as much or at all even, right? So there's an element of truth to leftism in a sense, but there's also an element of truth to the villain or villager being the villain and the noble being the hero as well. And that's how they line up, basically. Now, the structure of reality is very interesting because what we learn is as the human population in the world grows, there's a certain tendency for people to pick a niche category of topic or concept or something and learn about it and keep the knowledge alive of older things like technology, methodology of manufacturing, concepts, philosophies, and so on. You know, and that's what nerd culture is supposed to be for, basically. It's supposed to be basically for retention or keeping the old ways alive on some level. Now, what you might notice is maybe in ancient Greece, let's say, there's like 100,000 people that are Greek philosophers. And maybe today there's only 50,000 that are Greek philosophers. However, 50,000 out of 8 billion is a lot smaller of a percentage, but even though it is actually like half of the relative number to the previous Greek philosophers back in the ancient times. So there's still a healthy amount of there's a healthy community, relatively, but the old knowledge or the old ways of looking at things become sort of niche, more so in the total population. However, with a growing population, what that means is the old ways still have a healthy representation on an absolute scale, And with the internet, it keeps these things alive longer and less haphazard. So the internet is a retention factor of old concepts. And some people say new is always better and so on, and I don't agree with that. Because new is built on the old, and if you forget the old, then you don't have a foundation. It's like the plus one versus multiplier thing all over again. And what we learn is that with these niche communities of old knowledge, there's a constant churn of the sum of human knowledge and all the weirdness and all the niche categories and so on that have their cult classics. It's almost like cult classics for movies. You know, they keep the movie in the public's mind a little bit at a low level, but it's always there. And the constant churn of that process with the zeitgeist or spirit of the times determines the direction society travels. So there's like a self-reinforcing structure of development that goes on. And people might say like, oh well, what about collapse of society and so on? But the thing is, the further we get along this path, the harder it is to collapse society, especially with high numbers of people. But what we're learning is, as well, that the more society grows and the more concepts in history and so on that we keep, the more impossible it is for someone to learn everything about their own culture possible. And its philosophies and so on in some sense. So there's like increasing specialization on the frontiers of development and progress, and increasing specialization in niche categories in the keeping of knowledge. And then you have the processors, the processing types of people who turn the frontiers of knowledge into settled lands of historical concepts and ideas and so on. Because they're settled, they're understood in that sense, very well. But you'll notice that some of these old concepts will bubble up in their moment in the sun, in the spotlight, and they'll affect the zeitgeist and the frontiers of progress. The general mood of the times at any given time. And also new information and learning will adjust and affect the frontier processing thing going on as well. So it's almost like a Hearts of Iron game in a sense, where you're battling with the forces of chaos. And I don't mean Warhammer chaos exactly, but I mean more Jordan Peterson chaos in a sense, which is slightly different, barely. But you're battling with chaos itself, and you're expanding the frontiers of civilization and its wisdom and progress and so on. But you have to keep MPs, which I think means military police, as like garrisons all throughout your own lands and country and empire and civilization in your borders to keep the peace, basically. So it's kind of like that in a sense, although I don't want to say that you need like actual enforcers necessarily. I don't mean in that sense entirely, unless you mean enforcers of like accuracy on the topic when you're talking about that topic alone by itself. So a very nerd, sort of autistic, gatekeep the tourists kind of way, keep it what it is kind of way. But then someone will like use it to develop a new thing, and it'll be an evolutionary split or evolutionary offshoot of the previous philosophy. So it'll be kind of descended from, but it won't be the exact same thing. And what we're learning, I think, is there is some sort of consistent through line of a rough, almost band of parameters. Like it's in between, like say 60% one way left or 60% one way right, kind of thing. We're just not sure the exact location of it, but there's like a band of possibilities, and like interpreting the the best course of interaction with the world of ideas. And I think I'm falling trap in a way, although I've got a little bit better sense of humor about it than Jordan Peterson. I think I'm falling trap to what made him so insufferable to people for a while, at least. A sort of self-importance, self-selection into being the one that unites the narratives and so on. But at the same time, like I've always felt kind of guilty that society's going to a dark ages, and like he was too actually. Um, and there's like a sense of like, well, I'm a very high IQ individual. I'm very intelligent, so I'm going to um, set the um, the uniting narrative of people. And of course, there's a joke by XKCD about how someone has 15 program languages and someone's going to write a program coding language to unite all of them. And then the joke is there's 16 now, not 15. So there's a kind of thing going on. But at the same time, there are ideas that are so powerful and commonality useful and applicable while being structured in a generally good way, or collections of ideas that do that, that they're like the sharks, the coelacanths, the crocodiles and alligators, in that they barely evolve over time. They're evergreen. They're pine fresh. And Christianity and Greek philosophy and so on are representations of that system. Like you notice, there's not necessarily a definite definition of like exactly pin it to the wall kind of accuracy in these philosophies or religions, but there's a general applicability and a rough direction it points you to in character and behavior and relations with other people in the world. Now, I've been under the impression that the Bible is kind of it's a little outdated for communicating directly with other people. So I've been trying to make my playlists with the Bible in mind as the foundation, as well as Greek philosophy a little bit, and some other philosophies like Lao Tzu and maybe even Confucius a little bit. I'm not sure, and so on. Um, I'm not sure, but like Kierkegaard, for instance, and Jordan Peterson, a little bit of Nietzsche, a lot of Carl Jung. And basically, what I'm doing is I'm trying to write my various playlists as a sort of collection that if you use the Bible, and I'm going to give a bibliography one day of all my influences, or major influences. And what I'm hoping will happen is that people will watch my videos and then they'll I don't know how they're going to, because I don't get recommended on YouTube much. But the goal is to write something so mind-blowingly profound and almost an update of Christianity, not in the core tenets and so on, but in almost a modern language interpretation guide to the biblical wisdom, because the language and the way of talking is very different. It's like turns of speech or phrase. The way that they phrase things is a little different, even in English, than we're used to in the modern times, even with English. You know, like, lean not on your own understanding, but lean on God and believe Him in every way, and He will make your paths clear. A good example of how that works is, I mentioned I'm kind of a 130 to 140 IQ person, basically. And Jordan Peterson's like a 145 to 150 IQ person. So, yeah. Basically, what that means is there's a sort of applicability to it where it's like, okay, you think so hard, reality starts to unravel before your eyes into the depths of like quantum physics and like galactic physics, on the depths and heights, the smalls and the bigs. That passage is explicitly for someone that does what I'm doing. It's basically saying, relax, the power above all powers knows you, and it will teach you when you're ready. So don't worry about it. Because if you don't have that, you will investigate the depths and heights of knowledge and like get yourself lost in the weeds. Because one man cannot contain the sum of all human knowledge. It's just literally impossible. It's like saying an ant can understand a human's concepts. You know, it's like saying like an ant can understand how to make a computer, basically. You know, it's just like, no, you can't. And what this is saying is basically the types of people that overthink things are given a command, not a suggestion, but a command by the thing that promises to give them everything they could ask for, including knowledge and wisdom, to relax. Like, you're overthinking, God says you're overthinking, He knows everything. It's not a matter of you're overthinking, never do it again. It's calm down for now, relax. There's a limit to what you have to do and think. And it's like a get out of jail free from overthinking card. Because if you don't have that God element, and this is why I said his personal relationship with God is actually kind of important here, is if the world were mechanistic, then the safest thing to do is think up everything that could possibly exist. And if someone else has deeper wisdom, they could use it to destroy you. And that's why leftist secular atheism is so neurotic about their betters in intellect and physical prowess and so on, and charisma and so on, because they don't have an ordering, uniting person and embodiment of all the good things who's powerful. They just have a swirling mass of chaos that some people are better at organizing than others. And the common human thread is that you cannot fully trust another human being. But the God thing says you can trust God and Jesus as God, so He's the human God who you can trust, and He's the unique one because that's his role and purpose. Now, I've been a little bit of a heretic and so on, but for all intents and purposes, in a sense, I still believe that principle. I just believe that he was limited as a human, but a prophet, but he fulfills the role of God as human. Like God-given directive, you will be as God and human, while not necessarily being actually God. So it's like God ordained and so on, because Jesus is so wise, and he's so caring, and he's so selfless, and so on. So he's like embodying all the attributes of God with God, training him to be that way, and so on. That's a bit heretical, but you notice how there's an ambiguity in my mind of whether Jesus was God or human, or fully God and fully human, and so on in my mind, but I'm still centering on the Jesus as God and human combined, and only Jesus kind of approach. Even like purposefully, psychologically, even if not like metaphysically true. There's something about approaching it as if it's true that just works, and I just am confessing that I don't know exactly what's going on, and I'm too much of a skeptic to fully commit to Jesus as God, even if it works. So it's not necessarily a matter of I'm saying this is the exact truth. It's a matter of I don't know at this point, and it sort of works, but I'm skeptical naturally, so I'm kind of like poking at it a little bit. Um, um, so there's an argument someone might make that Jesus is more God and more human because of that as an argument. And I can kind of see it in a way, but I'm still that skeptic. I'm a natural skeptic. Like I didn't believe in God because I just wanted to. I didn't care. God came into my life and proved himself to me. So yeah. And the thing is, we have to resist postmodernism in some sense and have a united narrative of society. And my efforts have been basically a interpretation tool and kit to the through line of the basic philosophies of the West and some of the East, and Christianity and Christian existentialism, a little bit of absurdism, and Carl Jung, and a little bit of Nietzsche. Yeah, like in some sense, I'm a slightly lower IQ version of Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Pajot combined, with a very caveman approach to these things. To life in general, I should say, maybe. So I'm like a caveman shaman approach to Jonathan Pajot and Jordan Peterson and conservative commentators and so on. But a very autistic one, basically. And a little schizo. So that's how it all unites into one. Now, the thing is, I will say this. People worry that the heroics aren't enough. But the truth is, another aspect of the hero isn't just self-sacrifice. It's service to a cause. And the cause can be personally identified with, not forced onto them by someone else. And the right approach to this is to trust, more or less, that somebody will eventually rise to the occasion, see a need in something, and perform whatever duties, tasks with them by the necessity to solve the crisis. So I'm not abandoning heroics, but I'm saying like trust in the the emergence of heroes as crisis become a thing. Uh, but remember, self-sacrifice is more often the heroic aspect, and self-sacrifice does not mean picking a fight with people. By the way, it means sort of like defending. I've already mentioned my abstracting tribes thing, so there's like a dimension to that in this. In my numbered videos, my first video was abstracting tribes. So there's like a legitimacy hierarchy to who you prefer to help out above the rest, extending outwards from the core. And what happens is society will crunch towards the core as you limit your what I can actually control mentality and expectations. And the unifying narrative will shrink, and the goal is to reassess the relations between the core of society, the right, and the outer limits of society, the left, and find some sort of commonality with them that they can both unite to, or some rough, loose approach to life that they can both agree on the general wisdom of, without necessarily agreeing totally on the exact, specific, precise, autistic detail of exactly um, what is meant by it. So, like, an example is when Gavin Ortland was talking in his like 5-day-old video now or something about the end times. There's like 4 different positions. There's like premillennialism, amillennialism, postmillennialism, and premillennialism has post-tribulation and pre-tribulation, which is like when the Antichrist comes or something like that. So it's like, okay. There's 4 different positions based on one Bible passage, and so on. And what he says is basically it's not necessarily important that you hold exactly one of these positions. I happen to be one. He says he's more amillennial, I think, of the 4. But he's basically saying like he thinks it might be that, but it's not going to spoil his relationship with other Christians if they're a different one out of those 4. And that's what the united narrative basically has to do for a society. So there's room for unique expression, but there's a rough band of limitations to it for the majority to find their story in that narrative, their personal story to line up with that narrative. And that's why deep art is so important, and so on. But you notice how you can get lost in the details, or you can ignore details by focusing on too simple a principle. And there's a tension between simplicity and overwhelmingness in the details and so on. And basically there's a happy middle ground of as many details as possible accounted for in as simple a statement as possible.